You go quiet when you're hurt. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you've found a reason to be okay with that. Maybe someone told you it's emotional intelligence. Maybe you read that it's your nervous system protecting you. Maybe you've built a whole story around being the type of man who processes internally, who doesn't react, who waits, is sure, until he has something worth saying. And that story is going to be harder to hold on to after this, because the psychology of going quiet when you're hurt is real. The mechanisms are real. The freeze response, the way your brain literally makes language harder to access during emotional flooding, all of that is real. And none of it is the problem. The problem is what you did with it. You took a response your nervous system built to survive and you turned it into a personality. You stopped asking whether the silence was still serving you. You just kept using it. And now there's an entire version of your life that exists in the things that were never said. By the end of this, you're going to understand exactly why you do this, what it actually costs you, and why the version of yourself that calls it strength is the version of yourself that's most in the way. If this channel is what you've been looking for, subscribe now. Let's start with what the science actually says, because this is where most people stop reading too early. There's a region in your brain responsible for producing language. Researchers have found that this region goes significantly quieter during emotional flooding, which means that when you're standing in front of someone who's saying, "Just talk to me," and nothing is coming out, your brain has genuinely made words harder to access. It is not stubbornness. It is a system override. And there is a freeze response documented and studied just as hardwired as fight or flight. When emotional pain feels too large to process in real time, your brain pulls back, slows everything down, keeps you from fragmenting. Here's what that explains. Why the silence happens at all? Here's what it doesn't explain. Why you're still using it 20 years later with people who have never hurt you. Because you didn't go quiet for the first time last week. You learned it somewhere. Something taught you that expressing hurt out loud wasn't safe. Maybe you cried as a kid and got told to stop being so sensitive. Maybe you opened up and someone minimized it, laughed at it, used it later. Maybe you tried to say you were hurting, and instead of being held, you got lectured or ignored or made to feel like your pain was the actual problem in the room. So you adapted, you got quiet, not because you stopped feeling, but because feeling out loud kept costing you. And that adaptation worked. It protected you. Your younger self built a real tool. The problem is that you are not your younger self anymore. The problem is that the tool you built for a specific environment is now the only way you know how to respond in every environment, including ones that are safe, including ones where someone is actively trying to reach you. Your silence is not a character flaw. It is a coping mechanism that outlived the conditions that made it necessary. And you have never asked it to justify itself since. So we've covered where it came from. Now let's talk about what it's actually doing. There's a concept called the window of tolerance, the emotional range where real communication is actually possible. When you are outside that window, flooded, raw, in the acute moment of pain, no real conversation can happen. No one processes clearly. Nothing useful gets said. This is real. And it's a legitimate reason to wait before speaking. But here's the thing you don't want to look at. The window of tolerance is supposed to be a temporary state, something you move through, a pause before re-entry. You have turned it into a permanent address. You don't wait until you're calm to say what hurt you. You wait until the tension dissolves on its own, until the other person moves on, until enough time has passed that bringing it up would seem like old business. And then you file it away. Not processed, buried. You tell yourself you're protecting the relationship. You are protecting the version of yourself that doesn't have to be accountable to it. Because saying what hurts you requires something. It requires naming what you needed. And naming what you needed means admitting you needed something. And admitting you needed something cracks the image. The image of the man who is solid, who handles things internally, who doesn't make it about himself, who is low maintenance and strong and not the type who lets things get to him. That image is the thing you are actually protecting when you go quiet. Not the relationship, not the other person from your unfiltered reaction, your self-concept. Here is the version of this that nobody says out loud. Part of the reason you go quiet is that you know what lives at the bottom of that silence. You know that if you open your mouth before you've processed it, what comes out won't be a conversation. So you hold it. And you call that protecting the people you love. And sometimes it is. In the acute moment, yes. Waiting is often the right call. But there's a second half to that sentence that you never say. You hold it, and then you never release it. The man who is actually protecting the relationship comes back. When the flooding has passed, when the window is open again, he comes back and he says, that landed wrong. Here's why. Here's what I needed. Not to assign blame, not to relitigate, just to close the loop that was left open. You don't do that. You move on. You let the tension dissolve. You appear fine. And internally, you add another item to a list that has no outlet and no name. You tell yourself, this is maturity. It's not maturity, it's accumulation. And accumulated silence does something specific to the people around you over time. It teaches them that when something is wrong, you won't say so. That the silence isn't a pause on the way to a conversation, it's the conversation's replacement. So they stop asking. They stop trying to reach you in those moments. They learn that your stillness is a wall, not a door. And you read that as confirmation. People don't really want to know, but you built the wall. And then you blame them for not climbing it. Now here's what this costs you at the level that matters most. Real intimacy is not proximity. It is not two people sharing a physical space. You can live alongside someone for years and remain entirely unreachable. You can be technically present in every room and emotionally inaccessible in all of them. That is not a relationship. That is parallel existence. The men who do this, and there are a lot of them, end up in connections that function but feel hollow. They can't explain the hollowness. The person next to them can't explain it either. Both parties sense the distance. Neither one can name the source because the source is invisible. It's the shape of everything that was never said. And here's the cost that lands deepest. When you consistently suppress the signal, you lose access to it. Pain is information. Hurt is information. It tells you what matters to you, where your values are being violated, what you need in order to function. When you override that signal every time, reflexively, automatically, you don't process it, you don't integrate it, you add it to a file that never gets opened. Over time, you stop knowing what you actually feel. You stop knowing what you actually need. You are operating entirely from the surface, managing the image, appearing composed, without any real internal compass to navigate from. You have outsourced your emotional life to suppression. And suppression is not a compass. It's just a lid on something that's still there. And it does one more thing that is hardest to name. Every time you swallow what's happening and present the composed version instead, you act from the belief that what is actually going on inside you is not worth someone else's time, that your hurt is too much, that your needs are too much, that you unfiltered are too much. Do this long enough, and that belief becomes the operating system. Not because it was ever true, but because you never tested the alternative. You never said what you meant and waited to find out what would happen. You never let someone see you hurt and discovered whether they stayed. You built an entire identity around not needing, and you never found out what it would feel like if you did. That is not strength. That is the most expensive comfort zone in your life. So what does actually changing this look like? Not in theory. The real move. The move is not to become an open book. It is not to process everything out loud in real time in emotional vocabulary you've never used. It is not to perform vulnerability. It is to stop treating your internal experience as information that no one else is cleared to receive. One sentence, at the right moment, to someone who has earned it. That landed harder than I expected. I'm not fine. I need a minute, but not because nothing is wrong. Something happened and I don't have the words yet, but I'm not going to pretend otherwise. That's it. That's the entire move. Not a speech, not a breakdown, not a confession. Just one honest signal that lets someone know you are a person who can be affected by things. Because you are. You just haven't been letting anyone verify it. When you do this, here's what you will find. Most people don't run. most people lean in because the composed exterior is one of the most common masks in existence, and everyone is quietly relieved when someone takes it off first. The man who never lets anyone see what's happening inside him is not protected. He is alone, and he has been calling that alone strength for long enough that he has forgotten they are not the same thing. Your silence was a survival skill. It worked. It got you here. But here is not where you want to stay. The pattern is not your identity. It is a habit that has never been questioned. And a habit you can see clearly is a habit that no longer owns you. Subscribe if you want content that holds the line.